Okay. Um, so what we're gonna do now is add some items into the scene, and there's a couple things that we're gonna go over related to this. So one is kind of a big concept that's important to game development and sort of like software design in general, which is using nested scenes. So we'll go over how to do that. The other thing is that as we make these items, you're going to see that there's a lot of similarities between how the items are constructed. So like the structure of the item in Godot is very similar. They have the same components. And then the main difference is just what are they being used for, which is determined by the script. So with our scripts, we have a bunch of different options of different types of things that we can add into the scene. And the script really kind of determines the functionality. The scripts have little descriptions. So, for example, if we want to add a collectible item, there's a little description of how you should construct the node in Godot. And so, that's basically like a little blueprint about how to build it. The scripts have a lot of stuff that we can do, but you can also write new scripts, or you can add assets from other places. So if there's specific functions that you want to put into the game that aren't covered by the scripts, let me know, and we can kind of brainstorm about how doable that those features might be. But we don't have to go crazy. We're still learning, so sometimes making things more simple is better. Anyway, let's start building some components. So far in Godot, we basically just have a level. The only scene that we've created is this level, and it just has everything like built into it. But as our game gets more complex and there's more components, we want to make sort of like sub scenes that have specific components inside them. This makes it easier to add those components into multiple different scenes. So for example, you might have several levels in your game, but the player in each one of those levels is going to be the same. So we don't want to recreate all of that stuff. What we want to do is separate our scenes into components, and then we can drop those components into different levels. So we can do that. I'm going to give an example of how to do that with something that already exists, and then we'll make one from scratch. So in our level, level 1, we have this player component, and it has like this, player node, and it's got a bunch of stuff inside of it. It's got an animated sprite for the player animations. It's got the collision shape so that it can collide with things in the scene. It's got our camera, which sets the perspective of the scene, and it's got our jump sound. And so what we can do is package this into its own little scene so that we can drop it into a bunch of different levels. In Godot, fortunately, this is pretty easy to do. There's different ways to do this, but I can just right-click on the player, and I can click on this button down here called Make Scene Root. Or no, wait, that's not the right one. Don't do that. Save branch as scene. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. So when I say save branch as scene, what this is going to do is going to make a separate scene with that node tree, and then it's going to reference the scene in the level that I'm in. So if I click on that, it's going to ask me where I want this to go. I'm just going to put this in my scenes folder, and it's going to name it after the node that I clicked on. So it's already called player, and then .tscn is the scene file type for Godot. So I can just leave that as is. If you want to change the name, obviously you can do that. And I'm just going to click save. So now what's happened is this player no longer has like the little drop down anymore. What it has instead is this little scene icon. And if I click on that scene icon, it brings me to this new scene that just has that player hierarchy. And so now I can drop this player hierarchy into any scene that I want to. There's a couple changes that I want to make before that's going to be doable. But if we look at it here, now you can see that player.tscn is in there. So if I close this and I open it up down here, I've got the same thing here. So in our Godot scenes, some scenes are levels with like maps and lots of components, but other scenes are just the individual components that we want to make multiple copies of. For scenes like the player that are just individual components, what you want to do is you want to have your player centered in the scene. So in the level, we have things in like different places, but in the individual components, we don't want this offset from the center, because what's going to happen is when we put it into a scene, it's not going to go to exactly where we want it. It's going to be like offset by a little bit. So when you make a scene like this, what we want to do is just click on the main player node and then go to the transform and just reset the position to 0, 0. So now it'll just be centered in the node. Sometimes you might want to have it where the feet are lined up with the bottom or something like that. It kind of depends on how you're designing your game. But most of the time, you just want it centered in the middle. So of course, when I go back to my level, that's going to change the position of the player. But now I can just go in here and select the move button and just move the player to wherever I want it in the main scene. And so the nice thing here now is, now this player, I can get rid of this like no select thing because it doesn't have any children anymore. It doesn't have the scene collection, but I can go over and edit it right here. And this sort of like blueprint, this scene, any level that I add the player into will have the same changes that I have in here. So now I have this component that I can reuse in lots of different places. So for the other components that we're going to add into the scene that we want to reuse, we're going to start by just creating a separate component scene, and then we're going to drop it in. So that's the next thing I'm going to do. I'm going to create a collectible item, which is a player life. So if my player gets hurt, he'll lose a life. If we want to gain a new life, we'll collect a new life. So we're going to go over how to do that next. Any questions on the new scene component? Okay, sweet. Yeah. Yeah. All right, so let's make a life collectible. So to do this, we're going to just create a new scene. So instead of building it in the level and then creating a new branch, I'm going to create a new scene, and then I'll drop it into my level. So I'm going to click the plus button up here, and that's going to create an empty scene. And depending on what you're making, you might want different nodes. And so this is another thing that the script will tell you. So if I go to my script view and I open up the file thingy here, I can read my scripts in Godot. You can read it in the text editor too, wherever you want to read it. I'm going to go to File and Open. And I'm going to open the script that I want to create. So I want to create a collectible. And in the comments up here, it shows me how to build that scene. So I need an area 2D. And then I need an animated sprite. So the area 2D is like the main node type. It's sort of like the character body. But the area 2D is just an area that we can detect if the player is inside that area or if other things are inside that area. It has an animated sprite, which is going to contain, obviously, the animations for our object. It has a collision shape, which is going to detect when the player collides with it. And then it has an optional audio stream player with a sound for when we collect the item. So to build this, this new item, we just have to follow this description. So the first thing is an area 2D. So if I want to make a node that's an area 2D, it's not one of my default root nodes. I have to go to other node. And then I'm just going to type in area. And I'm going to add this area 2D. This has a warning because it needs a collision shape. So we're going to add that in a second. But let's keep going with our blueprint. So we need an animated sprite 2D next. So I'll click the plus button and type in animated sprite 2D. And then we need a collision shape. So I'll do the same thing, type in collision shape. I accidentally made the collision shape a child of the animated sprite. That's not what I want. I want it to be, these are all childs of the area 2D. So they should all just be in the first level of this area 2D. And then I have an optional audio stream player. So I'll type in audio stream player. I can use a stream player 2D or a regular stream player, but I'm going to use a 2D positional one. And then the name for this is right here. So this needs to be called collected sound to work with the script. Okay.
What was the sound thing we had? Just like audio what?
Audio stream player 2D. Okay, so we've created our nodes, but we have to edit them a little bit. Oh, I haven't saved the scene yet. Okay, so when I hit Command S, I'm going to save the scene. I'm going to go to items. And this is a collectible, but it's a specific type of collectible. It's a life. So I'm just going to call this life.tscn. And then I'll go to the 2D view. Okay, so there's nothing here, but we're going to start to design this. So my area 2D doesn't have anything in it. It's just kind of like a holder for these other things, but it's going to be able to detect the player. So I'm going to rename this life. So that way when I import it into the level, that's what it'll show as the node name. So I'll save that. Then for my animated sprite, this is where I need to add my art. So I grabbed some old art that I made for my item life, which is this little heart. And there's two, this is a sprite sheet, so it's just like the player sprite sheet that we made. You can see the first 3 frames are a little heart animation where it's just kind of like glowing. And then the last 5 frames are when we collect, we play a different animation. So I'm going to close that. So that's what I'm going to use as my art. So for my animated sprite 2D, I'm going to go to animation and go to new sprite frames. This is a little bit review. We did this with the player, but we're going to review it real quick. So we need the animations to match what's in this script. So if we go back to our script view, we can look for the animations. So we need a collected animation, and then the other animation actually doesn't matter what it's called. It's going to be the default. So you can leave it as default, or you can name it idle. So let's go back to our sprite frames. So I'm going to rename it idle just to kind of keep with the conventions, and I'm going to set this to autoplay so it'll start playing. And then I'm going to add the frames from that art. So I'm going to click on my little waffle button, go to sprites, and then grab my item life and open this. And let's zoom in a little bit. And so we have to match the columns and rows. So there's 3 horizontal columns and there's 3 vertical rows. And then the main animation, the idle animation, is just these 3 frames. So I'm just going to add that in. And we can see this play. It's just going to look like that. It's pretty basic, just a simple example. So that's how the animation is going to look until we collect it. When we collect it, we need an animation to play to show that we collected it. So I'm going to add another animation. I'm going to call this collected. And this actually does have to match the script. So if you don't use a capital C or you spell that wrong, it's not going to work. And then I'm going to add in those frames for when it gets collected. So those are the last 5 frames. And that's just going to look like that. It's just going to disappear. Okay, so I'm going to save that. So I've got my art for this life object. Oh, whoops. If you get lost, just hit F and it'll focus whatever you clicked on. Okay, so we've got our animation. Pretty simple, but we just need something to show, the object. Okay, so now we need a collision shape. So the collision shape is what the player runs into so that the game engine knows that we've, hit the item and we can collect it. So we just want a shape that basically roughly matches the art. Typically, you want it to be a little bit smaller than the art because you don't want to trigger the collision before they're actually like visually overlapping. So for the shape, I'm going to choose a circle, and I'm just going to make it smaller than the heart and put it kind of in the middle. Doesn't have to be perfect, but that when the player collider hits that collider, we're going to collect the heart. For the sound, I'm going to just load a sound. So I'm going to go to audio, and I'm going to grab my, I'm going to use a pickup coin for this, but it'll make sense, hopefully. And most of these, okay, Godot crashed. Sometimes that happens. We'll see how much, let's see. I saved that part. I didn't save the audio, so we'll redo that. Sometimes Godot crashes. That's why it's good to save a lot. Just hit Command S a lot. Okay, let's add our audio again. So I'm gonna go to audio, use the pickup coin, and I'm just gonna turn the volume down just a little bit. I'm gonna do -3. I think that should be fine. Okay, so we've set up all the components. Now we just need to connect the script and make sure everything is set up right. So the script should go on the main node. In some cases, you might have multiple scripts, but most of the time you're only gonna have one. So the script is on the main node. The life, we want it on the main node. So if you add the script to the animated sprite by mistake, it's not gonna work correctly. Make sure you add it to the main node at the top. We're gonna click the empty and go to load and go to scripts, and we're gonna use the collectible. So the collectible script works with any item that's collectible. It doesn't have to be a heart or a coin or something else. Anything that's collectible needs the collectible script. We need to give it a type. It doesn't need a type to work if you just want to collect things and it doesn't do anything else. But if we want to connect it to other parts of our code, we need to know what we've collected. So I'm just going to call this life. Just going to match what we've got there. And then if we want to edit the script or look at the script, now we can just click on this script icon. And there's one other thing that we need to do to make this work, which is to connect this signal. So this is also a new concept, but if we look in here, there's this thing called, and there's some descriptions in the script that explain what these things are. Okay, so there's a signal called onCollected. The signal is basically a little piece of code that communicates to the other scripts in the game if something happens. And so we can connect signals to other parts of our code. And sometimes we even connect a signal to its own object. So when we collect the object, we want to emit this signal onCollected. And that's we can connect that to other parts of our code to do different things. When the animation finishes, we want to, or when we collect the item, we're gonna play the collected animation. And when the animation finishes, we want to tell the item to disappear, which is what we do here. We say queue free, which basically just gets rid of the item from the game memory. One last thing that we want to change here, just like we did with the player jump sound, is we want to remove the comment here to play that collected sound. If you don't have the sound yet, then just leave that part for now. Okay, so the one last thing that we have to do to connect a signal in the node menu next to the inspector, you can see all the signals. And some signals come from things like the area 2D, and some signals come from our script, like onCollected. So we need to connect the signal onBodyEntered for when the player interacts with this item. So you can see the body entered signal, and so we want to connect this signal to the script. So to do that, we just double click, and the script should have the function that matches, but just to make sure, you can check. So you can see that we're connecting it to this node here, and there's something called the receiver method. This is basically the function that deals with this signal. So if we click on pick, you can actually choose which method you want. So if you're not sure, just click on pick and make sure it matches. But it should be designed so that it matches. So we're going to click connect here, and you're going to see a little green arrow pop up. If it connects to some code that already exists, that means you did it right. If something like this happens, just as an example, if I click this one and this function doesn't exist, it's gonna make a new function that wasn't there before. So if you see a new function that wasn't in the script before, that just means that it's not connected correctly. If that happens, you can try it again, or just let me know and I'll go over it. But we can just undo that. And if you want to disconnect a signal, just click disconnect here. Okay. And so the other signal we want to connect is our animation finished. So this is in the animated sprite. So we click on the animated sprite, keep this node section open. Animation finished. This is just going to get rid of the object after the animation plays. So this is a very common pattern in games, because when something happens, we don't want to just make the thing disappear immediately. We want to play an animation so the player understands what's happening and then make the object disappear. So with the animation finished, I'm going to double click. This is still connecting to the life signal here. And I want to pick the on animation finished method. So this is actually an example where the receiver method that it generates is not correct. So we want to click pick and then choose on animation finished and then click connect. So we should see these two little signal icons. So the signal icon basically shows you that there's a signal there. If we click on that, it'll take us to where they are. Okay, so there's a few steps here. And actually there's one more step. We're almost done, but there's one more step. So we have this life area, and for our collisions, remember we have our collision masks and layers. We talked about that a little bit last week. The collision is going to be on the main node. So if we go down to this collision area here, we have layers and masks for the different components of the game. And we just want to make sure that these line up. So the layer is the object that we're editing. And we can add a new layer by clicking on this drop down and go to edit layer names. And I'm just going to go here and add this layer, life. And then I'll select that layer and then turn off the player layer. The mask part is easier. We just leave that on 1. That's the player. And we want to look for interactions between the life object and the player, but we don't want the life object to interact with anything else in the scene. So we can ignore that. Okay, so we've built our life object. Now we can add it into the level. So I'm going to go back to the level, or to the 2D view, and go to level 1. And in my scene hierarchy, I'm going to add a little node 2D as a organizational little folder node. And I'm going to call this lives. And now if I'm adding a scene that's a different component in my project, it won't be in the plus button. The plus button is just the default Godot components. To add a component scene, I need to use the link button. So I'll click on the link button, and you'll see all of the scenes that I myself created. So there's that life scene. I'm just going to open that. And now you can see the little heart scene here. And we can move that around and decide where to put it in our scene. So let's put it over here. Let's say if we make this platform jump, we'll give the player an extra life. And if I want to make more of them, I can just click on the life and hit Command D to duplicate. And now I have another one I can throw up there. And so all of these lives are just copies of that scene that I just made. If I want to edit the original scene, I can go back here, or I can click on the scene icon in the level 1 hierarchy. Okay, so we should be able to collect those lives. One last thing we have to do, if I click on the player, we want to make sure that the player is going to be able to interact with the life. So in the player's mask, this is the other objects the player is looking for. We just want to turn on life here. Okay, so now if we run this scene, I should be able to collect this life. And there we go. It's not quite working. You can see that the animation is repeating, which means that we missed something. So we'll take a look. But everything else seems to work, although I can't get up to this platform. I might need a little more jump power. Or a double jump. Okay. Let's see if we missed something. So the animation triggered, but it didn't. Oh, I know what I missed. Okay, I missed one. This is a little detail, but it's important. Okay, so with my animated sprite, with my collected animation, we need to turn off the loop button on here. If it's set to loop, then the animation will never finish, so it'll never tell the script to remove it. So we just need to turn off the loop there. Okay, let's try that again. And let's give my player double jump so I can get up to the second one. Okay, now it goes away. And now we've collected the other life. Okay, so we've created an item. It's a lot of steps. It does take a little while, but the good thing is that pretty much every single item is exactly the same as that. They may be more or less complex. So let's add another item, and then we'll see where we're at time-wise. Any questions or anything to review?
For the animated sprite on the item, I noticed that they also had those 3 like Wi-Fi looking bars next to it. What did we do to get that there? I think I missed this step because I did everything else.
On the animated sprite, so you go to the node panel, and we want to connect this animation finish signal. So when the collected animation finishes playing, we want to connect that to the script. So you just double click, and that brings up this menu. And then we want to pick the function. And the function we want is this on animation finished. So we hit OK, and we hit connect. And this will bring up the script if you don't have it open. And it should just have a little green arrow pointing to that on animation finished. Okay. Any other questions?
What signal do you put on life?
That one is the body entered signal. And that connects to on body entered.
How did we insert the light into this other scene?
You just clicked on the link button. So click on the node where you want to add it, and then click on the link button here. You can also right click and go to instantiate child scene, or you can hit Shift Command A. But you can click on the link button, and then you should just see it in the menu here, and just click open, and it'll add it at 0, 0. So then you just move it to where you want it. Other questions? Okay. I'm gonna add another item, but then I'll give you guys some class time. So if I want to add another collectible item, instead of starting from scratch, what I can do is basically just copy the scene of the life and then change the art and change a couple parameters, because everything else will basically stay the same. So to do that, I can find the life scene in my file system, and if I right click, I can duplicate. And I'm gonna call this Apple. I have a little Apple graphic. So I have an apple now. And the apple is exactly the same except for the art and the item name. So I can leave my signals the same, but I just want to change, instead of collectible type is life, it's going to be apple. And then I want to change the art in my animated sprite, but it has the same animations because it's the same type of object. So for the idle animation, I'll just delete the frames that are in there. And then I'll go to my waffle button and go to sprites, and I'll choose my apple. And then this one is set up pretty much the same way. There's 3 columns and 3 rows, and I'll just choose these 3 frames. So now I've got a little apple animation. And then for my collected one, I'll delete the heart frames, click on my little waffle, grab my apple item, and then get these frames of the apple disappearing. And that's pretty much it. Oh, I also want to change the sound. So instead of the coin sound, I'm going to load that apple sound that I created. So everything else will work the same because it's the same type of item. So I don't have to recreate all that other stuff. And I do want to change the name of the apple thing up here. Okay, so let's go back to level 1. And now I'm going to make a little node 2D holder for my apples. And I'm going to instance an apple. So you can see I have that apple scene in there now. And there's my little apple guy. I'll throw this guy over here and maybe make a couple copies. So now this is probably too much of a reward for making one jump. But now if I make this jump, I get an apple, a heart, and another apple. I didn't really hear the apple sound. Let me try that again and make sure it works. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. So now I have a life, I have an apple. Let's make an obstacle real quick. And then we'll wrap up for this. So for the obstacle, it's very similar, but it's a little bit different. So you could copy and paste, or you could start from scratch. I'm going to go through this a little bit faster, but it's basically the same steps. So I'm going to create a new scene. It's going to be an area. So the player will be able to enter the area, but it's gonna be an obstacle, so it's gonna hurt the player. If you want it to block the player, then instead of an area, what you want to use is a static. But you may have to change the script. Actually, let me double check the script for the obstacle. Yeah, it uses an area. Although the name of the script is static, so that's a little confusing, but yeah. So we want an area 2D. And I have these like little flower obstacles, so I'm just gonna call this flower. I'm gonna save this in my scenes as a flower. It is an obstacle, so it's a little misleading, but that's what it's called. And so let's go ahead and add the script first. So I'm gonna go to scripts and add my obstacle static. And this way I can click on the script and oh, this one actually doesn't have... That's weird. Okay, I didn't put in... I'll add this later. For some reason, this one doesn't have a description of the node tree. That's weird. I don't know why I don't have that. Okay. Sorry, I'll have to add that later. This actually has something else in it that we haven't talked about. Maybe this isn't the best one to do. The hit timeout. That's okay. I'll add these notes later. So this basically needs the same things as our other collectibles. It needs an animated sprite for the graphics. It needs a collision shape for the collision. Make sure it's not parented to the animated sprite, just like we did before. It needs a sound, so we need an audio stream player 2D. And it also has this hit timeout. So that means that, it won't hit the player more than once. So that's a little timer. So let's add in a little timer. And whenever you see a green thing like this with a $sign, that means it's referencing something over here. So we need to make sure this is the same. So let's call this hit timeout. And here's our sound, hit sound. So we can uncomment that. And we need to rename our stream player hit sound. Okay. So let's set up the rest of our obstacle. So the animated sprites, we can... Oh, this actually doesn't necessarily need to be an animated sprite because it's just an image. So let's use a regular sprite. So I'm just going to change the type to sprites 2D. And it doesn't change the name, so I'm just going to call this sprite 2D. But it's not referenced in the code, so it doesn't really matter. So let's add our sprite. I have this little bloody flower looking thing. And for this one, let's go to 2D view. This is a sprite sheet. So let's go to animation, and we have 2 frames horizontal and 3 vertical frames. And then you could choose different frames if you want different frames. I think this is supposed to be an animation, so you could make it an animation, but either way, it doesn't matter for this one. And then the collision should roughly match the art. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and for this one, I'm going to add a capsule shape, and I'm just going to scale it down a little bit to kind of roughly match the art. I'm accidentally moving the hit sound, so let's lock that. Okay. So you don't want it to be bigger than the art, because then the player will run into it before you're actually interacting with the art. And then this one just needs one signal, which is when the body enters. So when the player body enters the obstacle, then we want to play the sound and register the collision. So we just click on the main node, go to the node tree, find body entered. The body entered almost always refers to the player. And we double click this and then make sure we're connecting it to a function that exists. So click on pick and go to body entered and click connect. And we'll save that, and then we'll choose the right sound for the hit sound.
It doesn't show up for me when I press pick.
Did you attach the script to the main node?
I thought I did. I guess it didn't connect.
Let's add the hit sound. So I'm gonna load. I made a little hit sound during the break, so we'll play that, and I'll play it at -3. So for now, we're not gonna set up everything with this, but we'll just have this interact with the player. So if I go back into my level 1, let's maybe put an obstacle on this platform over here. So I'll make a new node 2D to add in my obstacles. And then I'm going to instance this flower obstacle. And I'm going to move this guy over here to make it a little bit more dangerous to go over here. And so we play this little sound. And my player's getting stuck, so we probably have an error here. So we may need to make a couple adjustments. Let's look at our debugger. I don't have an animation for the player getting hit. So I'm getting an error here because I haven't actually added that player hit animation yet. so if you don't have a player hit animation, you can just like duplicate an animation and rename it hit, and that'll fix that error. Otherwise, we need to fix it. So let's go to the player real quick. So we'll go to the player scene, go to the animated sprite. And so we need an animation to play when the player gets hit. So I'm going to make a new animation. I'm going to call this hit, capital H. And fortunately, I actually did add this earlier in class randomly. So let's just use this. So we have two columns. So I'm just going to go between the two, the normal player and the red player. And I'll just play those frames back to back. And that'll be my hit animation. It's pretty straightforward. Okay. Let's see if that works now. Okay, so he gets hit, but I still can't move. So I might be missing something. Let's see. Oh, you know what, actually? Okay, so we do need to modify the player a little bit. Let's look at the player script for a second. So, just like we added that signal for our object, we actually need to do the same thing with our player. So when we get hit, we need to tell the player to reset, which we do with this on animation finish. So once the hit animation is done, we'll reset the player. So I just need to click on the animated sprite and go to node and go to animation finished and connect this to the main player node and pick the on animation finished function. Okay, so now we should get hit by the flower, but then keep moving. Uh-oh. Maybe not. Let's see if I missed something. I don't have any errors. Oh, same thing. Anytime you have this, you need to turn off the loop button. So yeah, for our hit animation and our collected animation, we need to turn off the loop. Okay, so now I can get hit. And I should be able to get hit again, but there's a little timeout. So if I run into it again... Oh, I may be... Okay, I may have one more step. Sorry, this always... making a game is hard. Let's see with my obstacle... Oh, I think I just... With my hit timeout... I think I need to make this shorter, so I'm going to make it like 0.2. And... I think otherwise this looks fine. I should have taken better notes in this script. Okay. If the hit timeout is stopped, this part all happens, and then we start it again. Okay. I might need to... No. I think it should work. One other option that you have is if you want to remove after a collision. With my flower, I don't want to, so I'm just going to leave it there. But you can turn that on if you want the item to disappear. Okay, let's see. Okay, there's something wrong with my timer. I'll debug that later, and then I'll update the script. But for now, let's just keep going. Okay. So those are a few different examples of objects. I want to stop because I want you guys to have time to start working on this stuff. But there's a bunch of different other types of objects. So, for example, we did the collectible and we did the obstacle. There's also checkpoints. There's a trigger scene. This is sort of like a script that will open another scene. So it works exactly the same way, but when you enter the area, it'll take you to a different scene. So you can, connect your scenes to each other. This script will trigger a UI, so it'll bring up, like, if you want the game to end, you can bring up a UI that says like game over or something like that. We'll talk more about UI next week. There's an NPC script. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah. I'll stop here, and you guys can work on building some of this stuff. There's a lot of steps, so if you get stuck on anything, let me know and I'll come help out. And if there's other things, if there's like little changes that you want to make, let me know. We could talk about how to implement that.